You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NAX. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Donovan Woods with the Fuels Institute and NAX, and I'm here with my co-host.
I am John Eichberger, also with the Fuels Institute and NAX, and happy to be here with you, Donovan.
Happy to be here with all of our listeners. You know, John, a lot of the things we talk about here at the Convenience Matters are things that are top of mind for retailers, things that really are on their minds to keep them up at night, and one of those things is change. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you're not talking about changing diapers. I think you're talking about the changing market conditions and what's going on in the fueling industry, and there's so much going on. So, you know, we sat down with Chris Brown from Stratus Advisors, who was one of our speakers at the 2018 NAC show, to get a better insight and perspective on what the future might hold in the transportation space.
Well, welcome, Chris. Thank you for being here with us. Good topic, talking about change. One of those things we had talked about was CAFE. The proposed changes with the corporate average fuel economy. What do you know about that?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. So we know CAFE is the sales weighted average for fuel economy for OEMs and manufacturers that sell cars in the U.S. Originally in 2012, it was targeted by 2025 to be at 54.5 miles per gallon. That was then lowered down to about 51.5 miles per gallon in 2016. That was a planned revision.
But even so, even with that slight revision, 50 miles per gallon is a huge jump over what we have today.
Absolutely, absolutely. And part of that has to do with the way that they create those numbers. Those are not the way that you would see the numbers if you were to go to your local dealership and look at the vehicles on the lot. The CAFE numbers are created from only a 2-cycle test, so there's not a whole lot of data input into it. It's a little bit more rudimentary, a little more high level. The stickers that you see on the lot, that's a 5-cycle test, so there's just more data goes into it. It's more real-world driving cycles.
I think it's also important, Donovan, to point out that the mileage per gallon requirements within the CAFE program, they're designed for an environmental purpose. You know, we talk about fuel efficiency, we talk about gaining more miles per gallon to reduce petroleum consumption and improve emissions. These are actually based on tailpipe emissions, on carbon emissions. So it's a greenhouse gas emissions reduction standard that is being calculated to be equivalent to a fuel miles per gallon standard. So it's important to recognize that the whole CAFE program, Chris, is about improving the environment, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. The EPA and the National Highway
Transportation Safety Administration.
There we go.
Those ones.
This is why we're all mic'd up, man.
So, yeah, those two organizations come together. The EPA actually does the testing, like you say, on greenhouse gases. And we know mathematically that every gallon of gasoline consumed is about 9 kilograms worth of CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions. So using that equation, obviously the one they use is more specific than that and a little bit more built out. But using the arithmetic, they're able to then convert it back to miles per gallon.
So we jumped into this really quickly.
Correct.
And it's a topic that I know both of you are very familiar with, and we've talked about it on webinars, and we've talked about it at the NAC show. Why should fuel retailers care?
Well, fuel economy is derivative of fuel demand, derives to fuel demand. So retailers are concerned with people coming to the retail location, coming to the C-store primarily for gasoline or for diesel or for whatever the liquid fuel is that they're getting there. In terms of the overall demand, and I know we haven't actually introduced the safer rule yet, and that's the proposed change to freeze the level at 2020 emissions levels or miles per gallon levels, if you will. Why do they care? Because they want to know if people are still going to come to their stores.
Yeah, so if we look at some of the forecasts, Donovan, the Energy Information Administration of the U.S. had forecasts that under the existing regulations for fuel economy, get to that 50, 55 mile per gallon threshold, you're looking at a 25% drop in gasoline demand by 2035. So think about that. That's 1 out of 4 gasoline gallons disappearing while the American consumers still drive the same distance. So they don't come to your store very often, as often as they might have previously. That is an opportunity lost. And so that's why they care.
So with that in mind, does this somehow bring into the picture alternative fuels like electric vehicles? Is this in addition to that fear, or is this something totally different?
I mean, I argue, Chris, that the electric vehicle drive is tangential and related. In the absence of an aggressive CAFE program and requirements, the motivation to introduce a lot of these alternative vehicles, which may not be cost effective at the time, that momentum, that motivation eases. And so there's not as much pressure to bring these technologies to market when they're not market ready yet. Would you agree, Chris?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, so for the 2020 standard, the proposal would freeze CAFE at 37 miles per gallon rather than the 51 or the high 40s that have been talked about prior. So that is, in and of itself, a large reduction. In terms of bringing in alternatives, electric vehicles, that sort of thing, I think that the incremental change will still exist just because of the global nature of the automotive industry at this point. All of the manufacturers that are selling in the U.S. are selling elsewhere in the world.
So, Chris, you said at the NACS show when you spoke and on the webinar the Fuels Institute did, when we're looking at the proposed amendments to the fuel economy program, freezing the improvement in required efficiency at the 2020 levels, you guys have kind of projected what that would do to gasoline demand, correct?
Correct, yeah. So we ran analysis on it, and as a deviation from the original proposal of hitting the 50s, we're showing that by the end of the decade, it'll actually be a net increase in demand of about 600,000 barrels per day. That's about 3% of the current fuel market in the U.S. That number is absorbable under the current supply-demand dynamics, but that is definitely a non-zero number and will definitely be seen in the retail space and in the market.
So, for everyone listening at home, how real are these changes? I know they were proposed, it's out there. Could this actually really happen?
I don't see why it wouldn't, honestly. I think that the 2020 changes are still a couple of model years away. Right. All of those vehicles to comply with that level are pretty well incubated at this point. So I don't see in terms of the 2020 timeline, those vehicles are already going to be made.
Yeah.
So I'll disagree a little bit. Part of the proposal that the administration put forth tries to eliminate California's ability to set their own fuel economy standards. The auto industry wants one national standard, and they were encouraging the Trump administration to negotiate with California like the Obama administration did to harmonize the California federal regs. The administration came out and said, we want one standard too, but why should California influence the rest of the nation? We want one standard, but it shouldn't be California's, it should be ours. So litigation has been filed on both sides of the issue, so that may derail this, or at least hold it up in the courts. But I think the bigger issue is, let's say it does go forth as proposed, what's the impact likely going to be on fuel efficiency? I mean, I think some people are thinking the auto industry is going to take their foot off the gas, so to speak, on fuel efficiency and hit the brake. I mean, I don't see that happening. Chris, what are your thoughts?
I think it goes back to the incremental versus transformational. I think the incremental gains will still be there just because of the supply chain, because it may be easier to take off some of the more expensive pieces that would be required to then hit the higher level, the higher fuel efficiency level. But the overall foundational elements of the vehicles that are being sold in the U.S. have increased in their fuel efficiency by such levels over the last 6-8 years that even taking off some of the most expensive pieces that would be required to hit that higher level, the baseline has lifted, in my opinion.
So without getting into the technical details, I know you and I have had this conversation several times, the tools available to the auto industry to improve efficiency are not just electrification. There's a variety of other things. So what have you guys been seeing as kind of the trajectory of the auto industry to gain more efficiency from their engines?
The easiest one is, well, maybe not easiest, but a few of the things that we're seeing across lots of different vehicle makers in terms of fuel efficiency and gains, start-stop technology. So when you're sitting at a stoplight, you notice that the car is not running anymore. You don't feel that little
vibration. And the air conditioner just got warm.
Exactly. But you don't feel that little rumble anymore. And it's a little jarring at first, honestly, but you get used to it. And that started off in just the top level luxury models, and now we're seeing it in almost every one of them. Cylinder deactivation, that's a big thing. To start off with, that's just when I don't need all of the cylinders in the engine to run, it's not going to run them. The idea being that you can concentrate the output out of fewer cylinders and still not necessarily feel the difference in the vehicle. Give or take that as you will.
We've also seen a dramatic reduction in size of the engines. The number of V8s and V6s being marketed have gone down dramatically. Inline four-cylinder engines paired up with a turbo booster are gaining such traction because you can get, with an advanced turbo engine, you can get the same performance, but you're sipping fuel instead of gulping it on a four-cylinder engine. So you're seeing a lot of what used to be V6 cars. I mean, I think 86% of passenger cars, not light trucks, but passenger cars are four-cylinder now. And that is an unbelievable number and shift in the market.
You mentioned earlier, well, first of all, your title actually is Analyst Global Automotive. And then earlier you mentioned how the automakers really focus on the entire market, the entire world, really. That isn't how it used to be.
Correct.
It was just America, and then there's another country in this country, but really it is a global industry. So what effect will things that happen, such as in countries like China, have on this market here?
Well, so China has made it a national policy to be the global leader in electric vehicles. They've got a lot of government intervention in that country, obviously very different government style, so that makes it a little bit easier than it is here. But I actually was reading an article that their brands over there are really pushing to get into the US and get into Europe and to get traction elsewhere in the world. So it'll be an interesting thing to see when that dynamic shifts, and rather than American manufacturers going over there, start seeing them come over here more.
And I think your question, Donovan, is really important because in the United States, we have pretty strong egos. We really think that the world revolves around
Here.
Washington, D.C.
Right.
But the reality is the United States is a 20% market share. China is like 33% market share of vehicles sold in the world. Europe is bigger than the United States. And the impact of American policies is significant, but in the grand scheme of things, may not have the impact some people think. 80% of the light-duty vehicles sold in the world are sold into a program of some sort of fuel efficiency requirement. It may not be stringent, it may not be strong, it may not be even forced, but the fact of the matter is the world is going towards a greater fuel efficiency market because the issues and concerns about climate emissions and criteria healthcare emissions are strong. So that's not going to be let up, which means that the automakers are trying to provide vehicles to China or into Europe, and the Chinese automakers trying to come into the United States and Europe. They're trying to build a vehicle that can be sold in multiple markets. And so the technologies they're employing to the vehicles to meet fuel economy standards in Europe, they become less expensive to apply to the United States, and so they're going to do that. I commented a couple times at presentations I made at the NACS show, how many car commercials have you seen where they boast worst-in-class fuel efficiency? They don't do it. The consumers want greater efficiency. The regulators across the world want greater efficiency. Chris mentioned our efficiency standards aren't changing until 2026. They're going to continue going up to 2020, and then they're going to stabilize, but that's still an improvement. We're still gaining traction. We're just not gaining it as aggressively as previously desired.
I think it'll be interesting to see whether the fuel economy arms race, if you will, continues above and beyond, just because of late there has been that sort of arms race around fuel efficiency so that they can point out best in class, this technology, that technology. It'll be interesting to see if the industry self-enforces in that way and self-regulates in order to keep that, we keep saying momentum, in order to keep that going. I wouldn't be surprised if it does.
You know, nothing happens if consumers don't want it to happen in reality, in terms, especially in this country. They really decide the market. So what do you think that's going to have any effect on them and their purchasing decisions, or actually will it have any effect?
You know, I don't think it will. I don't think when we've done our analysis on what consumers buy vehicles, why they buy vehicles, cost of the vehicle, fuel efficiency always rank 1 and 2. When the Auto Alliance measures importance of vehicle attributes on a scale of like 50 different attributes, fuel economy is down in the 30s. So consumers will buy vehicles that they need, that they can afford, and that have the attributes they're looking for. And those attributes are numerous, not just fuel efficiency. But once they identify what type of vehicle they want, they may pick the vehicle that has a little bit better fuel economy over a similarly equipped one, similarly priced one. That could be a tipping factor. But most of the time, they're not going in and saying, I'm buying the most fuel efficient vehicle. I don't care what it is. If I have a family of 4, I'm not buying a subcompact.
Right.
I can't. If I have to pull a boat or a horse trailer, I'm not buying a sedan. So they're going to buy what they need. The other thing is consumers don't buy vehicles that often on basis. When I say cost, it's not based on the MSRP. It's what's my monthly payment.
Correct.
And we've got purchase loan terms out there 72, 84 months. And I'm hearing rumors of 90 plus month being put into these purchase contracts. Okay, it's pretty easy to hide a couple $1,000s in 90 months of payments.
Right.
So I don't think it's going to have that much of an effect on the consumer.
I don't think it will, honestly. I think that the consumer tends to buy the vehicle. There are either consumers that buy vehicles purely on a practical standpoint. I need a car. It needs to fit me, my partner, my 3 kids, whatever it is. Or there's the other buyer that tends to be above the average price, and they go for the 10%. Well, I need to haul the boat. I need to be able to max out the payload in that truck. Half the American market's trucks. Right. If that person's that concerned about a fuel economy difference of 21 miles to the gallon versus 22, 23, that's probably going to be lost in the wash.
And quite frankly, the interest in fuel economy has gone down because of historically low fuel prices the last 3 or 4 years. If oil prices go back to 110, 120 bucks a barrel and gas prices go up, the interest in fuel economy will go up. Whether that translates into purchase, we'll see. What we do know is when the price at the pump is higher, interest in alternative vehicles goes up. Not necessarily purchase of them, but interest goes up. That could manifest itself, but keep in mind, the United States is pretty good at poking holes and extracting oil from previously unrecoverable areas. And the United States now is that market that can influence the global price of oil and keep that inflationary impact in check. So I just can't see, I don't see that being a driving force. And Chris is right. They buy the car they want. They buy the car they think they need. And I think you and I had this conversation, Chris. They buy to the extremes. Mm-hmm. I may need a 4-wheel drive in case it snows one day in January in Texas. Right. So they buy the 4-wheel drive.
That has happened before.
I know it has, that one time, right? Or I need to be able to pull 10,000 pounds in case I need to pull 10,000 pounds. Right. When are they going to do that? Not very often. But that mentality of buying to your extreme absolutely is a paramount interest to the consumer.
And I think we've done a lot of talking around the addition side of the fleet equation. The subtraction side is obviously vehicles coming out of the fleet. Regardless of what new vehicles will be sold in terms of what their economy is, the fleet that's on the road is still going to be the fleet that's on the road. And vehicles are staying on the road longer and longer. I think it was from 2007 to 2017, vehicles, actually the average age grew almost 2 years. And that trend is just going to continue. So vehicles on the road will still be the vehicles on the road. We're just talking about the addition to the fleet.
There was a time when 100,000 miles on a vehicle was a noteworthy. Remember the Toyota commercials where they jump in the air when they get to 100,000 miles? Well, now you buy cars with warranties that are more than 100,000 miles. You're right. I mean, we're holding on to our vehicles a lot longer. Vehicles are starting to transition to commodity instead of a aspirational item like it used to be. We used to dream and think about what kind of car can I get. I mean, the next generation of consumers are more focused on their smartphone than they are on what kind of car they're going to drive. So I think we are, and you're right, it's all about fleet turnover. And the administration said if we slow down the rate of new vehicle purchases, we slow down the improvement in the fleet on fuel efficiency and safety. That's 100% accurate. The question remains, what is going to cause consumers to stop buying new vehicles? And I honestly believe it's the return to market of leased vehicles that fit the needs, the crossover utility vehicles. New vehicles sold, 35% were crossovers. those vehicles just started being leased a couple years ago. They're starting to come off lease. That's what the American consumer wants. And now they can buy it well apportioned for 10, 15 grand below a new car. That's going to hurt fleet turnover more than anything else the government might do, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there are about 40 million used cars available for sale right now in the U.S.
We rarely talk about that, right?
That is almost never discussed.
Compared to the 17 million we sell a year. Right.
Right. And if all of the new cars that are sold are selling at an average of about $36,000, and all of the new trucks, just the truck class, so half of it, is averaging about $48,000. That 40 million rather of the used vehicles that are available for sale
At 20. It becomes very attractive.
Doesn't feel bad.
Right, it doesn't matter. And you know what, I got to tell you. Okay, so I can spend $20,000 for this vehicle. It's 3 years old. It gives me 25 miles per gallon. Or I can spend $45,000 for this new vehicle that gets me 26 miles per gallon. It's pretty much a no-brainer, you know, and I think that's something we seem to gloss over. I mean, Chris, you're right. We never talk about the used car market, but we love sexy new. It's exciting, but that used car market is a major impact, and I think it's being completely ignored by those who are trying to anticipate what the impact of the CAFE program is going to be.
I have to imagine more people lease cars now than they ever have, so that's a lot of cars.
35%, right?
Mm-hmm. That ballpark, yeah.
So let me wrap this up for us then. Those listening, if you're a retail owner or in that business, what should they do? Now, we've talked about things that haven't happened yet. We're predicting, we're hoping, we're seeing trends, but what can they do to prepare for any changes that are coming?
Keep selling fuel. People are still going to need fuel.
The trip numbers are likely to go down, whether it be electric vehicles, whether it be fuel-efficient vehicles. It doesn't matter. We're going to see a decline in per capita trips to refuel. It may not be dramatic, but we're going to see it. How do you de-emphasize your reliance on the fuel island? Keep selling energy for transportation, however you define energy for transportation. Keep selling it. But how do you diversify your offer? If consumers don't need to come to your store every 4 days to refuel and they're only coming every 5 or 6, how do you get them to your store more frequently? What are you offering? What's your compelling value to get your customers to keep coming to say hi? If you don't do that, you're going to be looking back on what just happened to me. But you got to keep evolving, and this industry is probably the best industry to take advantage of opportunities and mitigate the effects of challenges. So keep doing what you've been doing and make sure you satisfy the customer.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you being here, and thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.